It started with a glass. A small, nondescript tumbler he always left on the corner of his nightstand, rim facing the bed, perfectly aligned with the edge. Not out of obsession, not even habit, just the way it always ended up after he placed it down. But one morning, as the gray light of dawn filtered through the window, he noticed it was turned slightly, not much, maybe 10 or 15 degrees off, now pointing toward the wall. He stared at it for a while, unmoving, as if waiting for his memory to correct the scene, to reassure him that he had put it down like that, or that perhaps it had been nudged during the night. But no memory came, and the air in the room felt still, as if holding its breath. The next night, he tried to replicate the exact position before going to bed, turned the glass so it pointed directly at the edge of the table, a straight line he could visualize perfectly in his mind. When he woke up, the glass had shifted again. A subtle but undeniable turn to the right. Clockwise. Not much, not enough to call it strange to anyone else, but he knew. He checked the floor, the table, even placed his phone camera nearby, though he didn't know what he hoped to catch. But the recording only showed darkness. And stillness. The glass sat unmoving all night. And yet, by morning, it had rotated again. He laughed it off. At first. Blamed it on uneven surfaces, on the subtle tilt of an old building, even on the imperceptible vibrations of city life. But the movement continued, and soon it wasn't just the glass. The handle of his toothbrush, which always lay parallel to the edge of the sink, had shifted ever so slightly. A coaster on the coffee table was no longer facing the same way. A framed photo had tilted, not crooked on the wall, just rotated within its frame, like someone had reached in and twisted it, gently, with purpose. It became a ritual. Every night before bed, he made mental snapshots of everything. The positions of items, the alignment of objects, the symmetry of things. And every morning, he'd wake up to a world that had turned just a little. Not dramatically. Not enough for chaos. But enough to feel off. The subtle shifts accumulated, always clockwise, always at night. The entire room, over the course of a week, had slightly rearranged itself, like a vast invisible hand was nudging everything along a circular path, bit by bit, without urgency. He tried to stay awake. Fought against sleep. Sat in the armchair with the lights off, watching, listening. But nothing happened while he was conscious. Everything stayed still. Utterly still. No creaks. No sounds. Not even the normal house-settling groans of wood and pipe. Just silence, a thick, unblinking silence that pressed into his ears. And eventually, inevitably, sleep claimed him. He'd jolt awake in the gray-blue wash of early morning, heart thudding, and the coffee table would be skewed a few degrees to the right. Always clockwise. Always slightly more than the night before. He placed tape markers on the floor. Small pieces, color-coded. One at each table leg, one at the corner of the rug, one at the base of the floor lamp. The next morning, they were useless. The rug had turned, the lamp had shifted, and even the table had moved with the tape still attached, as if the entire room obeyed some larger alignment, and his attempts to anchor it were ignored. The clock on the wall, he was sure it hadn't always faced that direction. He began to feel like the apartment wasn't just rearranging, it was rotating. Very, very slowly. Then came the dreams. Vague at first. Fleeting impressions of being turned, repositioned, like furniture moved carefully in a dark room by unseen hands. He dreamed of seeing his bed from strange angles, from corners he couldn't physically reach. In one, he was lying on the ceiling, looking down at himself asleep, while objects around him slowly spun, as if he were the center of a vast, silent mechanism. He woke up with a dry mouth, soaked in sweat, the bed slightly shifted, the headboard no longer flush against the wall, as though someone had pulled the frame gently, almost respectfully, a few inches out. He stopped inviting people over. He stopped calling anyone. The idea of describing what was happening filled him with dread, not because he feared disbelief, but because part of him believed that putting it into words would make it more real. That by acknowledging it, he would no longer be a man observing a phenomenon, but a man inside of it, part of whatever force was turning his world, clockwise, bit by bit, night by night. He no longer trusted the apartment. He no longer trusted the day, it felt hollow now, meaningless, like the space between turns. He knew the changes only happened at night, but the day was merely an illusion of stillness, a temporary pause in a process he had no say in. And worse, he began to feel that he himself might be shifting too. Just slightly. Waking up with his arm at an odd angle. His head no longer resting on the pillow, but turned more sharply than he remembered. His spine aching in a way that suggested he had been twisted. And still, the world remained silent. No footsteps. No sounds from the neighbors. No vibrations. Only the quiet, relentless motion of something he could not see. Something that turned everything, slowly, precisely. As if aligning it all for a purpose he didn't yet understand. And now, every night before bed, he sits at the center of the room and wonders. What happens after the full rotation is complete? He began marking the days by degrees. Not with a calendar, that had started to feel absurd, but by angles. The way the couch had rotated 6 degrees clockwise from its original position. The rug, now misaligned by nearly a full foot. The ceiling fan, once centered over the table, now casting an off-kilter shadow on the opposite wall. He had sketched the room's layout on paper, dozens of versions, each slightly more skewed than the last, like some untraceable cartography of distortion, a map of motion without motion. He didn't know why he was documenting it anymore. No one would see the sketches. He barely looked at them himself. But he couldn't stop. At first, it had seemed like the world around him was the thing being turned. That the apartment itself, its objects, its geometry, was shifting under some vast external logic. But now he wasn't so sure. Because it wasn't just the room that felt rotated. It was him. His sense of balance was failing. Not in the way of illness, not dizziness or vertigo, but a subtle, persistent mismatch between what his eyes told him and what his body believed. He would reach for a doorknob and miss. He would pour water into a glass and see the stream bend, ever so slightly, to the right. He would close his eyes and feel himself tilting, as if his spine were no longer perpendicular to the floor, but gently corkscrewed. Sometimes he caught his reflection looking slightly off-axis, his own head, just a degree too far turned, his own shoulders, slightly misaligned, as if mirrored in a surface that wasn't flat. He would snap back, realign his posture, but the unease remained, lingering like a sour breath behind him. He stopped trusting the mirrors, just as he had stopped trusting the lights, the clocks, the very notion of straight. Everything, absolutely everything, seemed to obey this new, unseen torque. He boarded up the windows. Not out of paranoia, but because the sunlight itself had started to look wrong. It didn't fall the way it used to. The beams that once cast long morning shapes across the floor now came at strange angles, pulling in corners they never touched before. And the shadows, they drifted too quickly. Not suddenly, but just fast enough that, if he stared long enough, he could see them creeping. Clockwise. Always clockwise. He tried to stay awake through the night again. This time with stronger coffee, a chair set firmly in the room's center, and a camera pointed at every corner. The night passed slowly. His mind ached with fatigue. And yet, again, nothing. No motion, no tremor, no whisper of change. Until morning. When he rose stiffly from the chair and saw that all 4 cameras, though still recording, had shifted slightly on their tripods. Turned. Only a few centimeters, yet undeniable. They had watched nothing. But something had watched them. From that day forward, he began to hear sounds. Soft. Mechanical. Deep beneath the hum of electricity, below the natural groans of wood and time. A distant grinding. As if an enormous wheel was turning beneath the floor. As if his apartment was only the visible sliver of some vast subterranean gear, dragging him slowly, inexorably around its axis. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit in silence and feel it, not hear it, not imagine it, but feel it, like a long, slow heartbeat pulsing under his skin.